And this is going to pick up right where your Lecture 2 notes left off. Lecture 2, we talked about incumbent advantage, which, remember, we call it incumbent advantage, but it's really a collection of lots of different advantages. And because of those advantages, we have high re-election rates in Congress. Especially in the House of Representatives. But incumbents do sometimes lose. And so what we're going to start off with are the circumstances where the probability of an incumbent loss and or a strong challenger increase. So whenever you see this in really anything, a lowercase italicized p, that stands for probability. And I know that some students are annoyed by my use of abbreviations in the notes, but some of this is to kind of get you guys into the habit of coming up with your own shorthand as you're taking notes. So what are some of those circumstances that make incumbent loss or a strong challenger more likely? One is scandal. If we have a member of Congress, House or Senate, who has been involved in a personal scandal, maybe a corruption scandal, the likelihood that they will lose or a strong challenger will take them on in the next election goes up. Another circumstance that can cause this increased probability is redistricting or gerrymandering. And so we've seen these terms kind of drift in and out of our notes. We will talk about them in more detail. The important thing to understand for now is that either of those, and they're related, can make it more difficult for an incumbent to hold on to their seat. It may very well take away that partisan identification advantage that they usually have. And they might have gone from being in a pretty safe Democrat seat to a Republican-leaning seat. Unpopular presidents can also be a reason for more likelihood of an incumbent losing and a strong challenger taking them on in an election. And guess what? American presidents are now generally unpopular. They are. I mean, they may have brief bumps in their popularity, and they're more likely to be at their peak immediately after they take office. But what that means is that by the time we get to those midterm or off-year elections, because remember, we have federal elections, congressional elections every 2 years. Presidents, of course, we elect only every 4. So always in the middle of a presidential term, we will have new congressional elections. If a president is unpopular, and again, they typically are, it's likely that voters will punish the party of the president by supporting congressional candidates from the other party. Sometimes this also plays into wave elections. A very unpopular president, bad things happening in the country, can produce wave elections. It's not always that unpopular presidents and wave elections go together. One example of a wave election does put the two of them together. 1932, the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It's the Great Depression. President Hoover is incredibly unpopular. I mean, people are naming shanty towns Hoovervilles. Piles of newspaper that people are sleeping under are referred to as Hoover blankets. Right? I mean, even if you forgot your U.S. history, I think that kind of gives us enough sense of what's going on. And so Franklin Roosevelt wins, bringing with him his New Deal. He has large coattails, and it is a huge pickup for Democrats in Congress. We call them waves because they also tend to have durable effects. So from that point on, from 1932 until the next wave election in 1994, it's pretty uncommon for Republicans to control Congress. I mean, in lots of ways they think of themselves mostly as a permanent minority party in Congress. The next wave election really isn't tied to an unpopular president. Certainly not like 1932. But in 1994, Republicans, especially in the House led by Newt Gingrich, put together what they call their contract with America. It's very popular, it's a clear policy program, and Republicans have their version of a wave election. It's not as large as what happened in the Great Depression, and that's not a knock against Republicans. Things were not as bad in the country in 1994 as they were in 1932. Now, this next bullet point is kind of going to seem like it doesn't actually belong here, because we're talking about defeating incumbents, but now we're talking about when there is no incumbent. The two actually do belong together, and that is because incumbents who know that they are likely to be defeated, that they are likely to see a strong challenger, know that it's time to move on. Incumbents don't want to end their career in Congress with an electoral defeat. Okay, so when they see one coming, they retire. Right, they get out on top. Right, this leads to an open seat. And open seats are very important in congressional elections because they are the primary way that we have membership turnover, meaning old members leave and new members of Congress come in. When we have an open seat, there is an increased probability that there will be serious two-party competition. It's not a certainty. I say it's an increased probability. The reason for that is it's still limited by safe seat districting. And of course, that only applies to the House because districting does not exist in the Senate. So I don't want you to overstate the likelihood of serious two-party competition. If Sam Graves should retire before the next midterm elections, that does not all of a sudden mean that Missouri's 6th congressional district is going to be just a hotbed of Democrat-Republican competition. Most likely what's going to happen is there's going to be intense competition in the Republican primary to see who is going to replace Sam Graves. But there are still some districts where when there's an open seat, you'll have pretty serious competition between Republicans and Democrats. Now, I've said previous things apply only to the House. Here are some things that are unique to the Senate that make senators, and here we're talking about incumbent senators, always in a weaker position than members of the House. And the primary thing here is that senators are at-large representatives. They represent an entire state. Missouri isn't divided east or west. Kansas isn't divided north and south with one senator for each part. Each senator represents the entire state. And so the competition is statewide. What this means is that their elections are always more likely to be competitive than House elections. As a result of that, from both parties, there will be more money spent. As we saw in the example of Sam Graves previously in Lecture 2, it was almost laughable how little money was raised and spent by Democrats in the 6th District. Now, I hesitated in Lecture 2 to use the adjective laughable because people might think that that's me saying bad things about Democrats. They are just in a desperately hopeless situation in Missouri's 6th District. So if you are a Democrat in Missouri's 6th District, there's nothing funny about it at all, but it is a comically small amount of money that they are able to raise and spend. In Senate races, you are far less likely to see that kind of lopsided campaign financing. You're also more likely to see serious party involvement on both sides. Part of the reason that Democrat candidates in Missouri's 6th congressional district don't have much of a shot is because parties know that's an uphill, the Democrats know it's an uphill battle, and so the parties don't put many resources in our district. In Senate elections, they do. And you also get stronger challengers to incumbents. And that continues to happen in Missouri, even as Missouri seems to be a solidly red, well, it's already a solidly red state. And the trend is for it to become an increasingly red state. And yet, in recent years, we've had a Democratic senator from our state, and we continue to have strong challengers in those elections. And that's because of the different nature of senators' representation. Okay. And as a final illustration, this map is not just up here to take space and provide splashes of color. You can see that there are more competitive. This does not mean Missouri is not red or blue. There's just no election coming up in 2026. But other states, even Texas, is, although likely Republican, it's still going to be more competitive. Democrats see that they have a chance there. Michigan, North Carolina, and Georgia are toss-ups. Those are going to be very competitive. But in general, even when it looks clearly red or clearly blue, we're still going to see more competition at the state level than we will see within individual districts. And now we're going to talk about apportionment and redistricting in more detail, since to this point we've just kind of thrown them out there and not talked about them very much. When we talk about apportionment, what we're really talking about for our purposes is reapportionment. And again, this applies only to the House. And it's a result of the decennial U.S. Census, which means it happens every 10 years. Sorry, I'm trying to drag that bar out of the way. It doesn't want to move. As a result of the census, we are able to measure the population change in the 50 states. Some states gain population, some states lose population. Some states continue to add population, just not as fast as other states. And so the number of representatives per state changes. And this is a result of, well, the way we do things now is a result of the Reapportionment Act of 1929. And this was meant to ensure automatic reapportionment. And that's It's not just some mechanical thing that just happens and nationwide we have lines change all on their own. It's not that kind of automatic. But what it does mean is there's no question about which states will gain or lose seats. In other words, will gain or lose a number of districts. It has happened to Missouri. Prior to the 2010 census, there were 9 congressional districts in the state of Missouri. After, there are only 8. And now, if you look up these maps to see how things have changed, it does not happen right when the census happens. There is a lag time for redistricting to happen. For Missouri, it's been about 3 years after a census, the districts are redrawn. We also need to understand it's always just a shuffling around of the same number of seats. The membership in the House is capped at 435 members. So over time, each representative represents more and more people. And we just continue to shuffle around those same 435 seats. After reapportionment, we have to have redistricting. Now, not every state. Missouri may continue to have 8 representatives after the next census, and so there may not be a need for redistricting. But when there is, it's always done by state legislatures. The method may be different, but state legislatures kind of are ultimately in charge. And redistricting is a partisan process. So it is subject to conflict, and it is contentious, to the point that we have Supreme Court cases all about redistricting. And we actually have quite a few, and enough that we're not going to cover them all. Now, I've here underlined the cases that are the required Supreme Court cases for AP. Okay, and of course, Baker versus Carr you've already looked at in detail. But we also need to put with that Westbury versus Sanders, because that is the case the state of Missouri emphasizes as more important. Now, the good news for you is whichever case it is, and both of them happen in the Warren Court. Now, I'm not going to test you over what courts these things happen in, but for some of you who are more interested in the law and maybe looking at a career there, it's kind of a good idea for you to understand the different court eras, because the chief justices kind of put their stamps on the courts. So these are Warren Court decisions. And for you, again, the easy part about both of them is they center on the idea of one person, one vote. And what that means is that district populations should be roughly equal. And then we have Shaw versus Reno, which is another of your cases that you've written a case brief about. From about 3 decades later, this was a decision of the Rehnquist Court. And Shaw versus Reno, you saw it as this thing that says that racial redistricting or redistricting solely based on race is unconstitutional. Shaw versus Reno is actually building on more than 3 decades of court precedent. But the conclusion is the same. Redistricting solely based on race violates the 15th Amendment. And with the idea that everyone, of course, the 15th Amendment is talking about male suffrage, but it applies to females after the 19th Amendment. Okay, but because of the 15th Amendment's focus on race and voting, the idea that you're redistricting solely on race violates the 15th Amendment. And the reason we talk about these cases, aside from just that they're required, and they're required for a reason, equal district populations and a prohibition against districting with race as the driving factor plays into our general requirements for redistricting. And general is put in italics for a reason. These are not iron laws like gravity is to physics. Different states are going to have different rules, but these are the general requirements. One comes from the previous slide, roughly equal population. It doesn't have to be exact, but they should be approximately equal. They have to be contiguous, okay? Meaning all of the territory has to be linked together without a breakage. Okay? So you can't have like a little blue island here and then like a little blue island out there. For that district, okay, all the parts of it have to be linked together in an unbroken way. Districts are also supposed to be compact. And now I've thrown Nebraska up here because it shows you that compact, what it means to have a compact district is going to depend on a lot of things. So it's not a hard and fast rule, because you have to also take concern not to have unequal population. So for Nebraska, where most of the population is on the eastern side, you have 2 of Nebraska's 3 districts. Okay? They still follow the compact rule. They're not bigger than they need to be. And the general idea here, if there's a general idea behind having compact districts, is to keep representatives in touch with their constituents. You also have to make sure that you protect racial and linguistic minorities. So you can't redistrict solely based on race, but you also can't ignore it. And you also can't intentionally try to work against the interests of racial or linguistic minorities. And the part of this that we'll introduce here is the prohibition against dilution. And this comes out of the Voting Rights Act. Now, we're not going to attach a date to it. First Voting Rights Act is in 1965, but it's been kind of amended and changed, so we just call it the Voting Rights Act. Should not jump ahead of that. And dilution, we're also going to see it referred to as cracking when we talk about gerrymandering. But the idea is that you can't draw districts to carve up racial and linguistic groups and spread them out across districts so that they don't have influence, because one person, one vote. Their vote has to count. If you dilute them, then their representation, their voice is drowned out. And you were also supposed to preserve what are referred to as communities of interest. And these would be people who have things in common. It might be rural areas, farming communities that you wouldn't want to or shouldn't divide up, so that maybe instead of farmers having a fairly strong voice in a district, they're split up between several urban-dominated districts, and nobody cares about farmers. A lot of times, though, what we're talking about are political subdivisions. So the idea that you should try to avoid, say, carving up a city among several different districts, because those people living in a city have a city government. They kind of have their own interests, and those interests should be represented in a straightforward way. It doesn't mean you can't cut them. If we look at Missouri's congressional map, the St. Louis metro area is our most densely populated part of the state. And so they have to carve up areas of that just because you have to keep population equal. So redistricting can be a bit of a mess. Fortunately, the snow days have saved you in this particular school year from a redistricting game. That's pretty good. We just don't have time for it. And that brings us to gerrymandering. Yeah, this is only for the House. Racial gerrymandering is, of course, not allowed. That's our Shaw versus Reno. Also, just because the state is more interested in this one, and I did tell you the precedent goes back to 1960, Gamillion versus Lightfoot is our earlier case about that. But partisan gerrymandering is allowed. The Supreme Court earlier ruled such that there were questions about how far racial gerrymandering could be taken. But in 2006, in United Latin American Citizens versus Perry, a case from Texas, the Supreme Court said that partisan gerrymandering is constitutional. There's nothing in the Constitution to prohibit it. And so we do most certainly get partisan gerrymandering. And it takes 4 major forms. First is packing. And packing is where you take people of particular groups. And where you can run into trouble with this is if you're trying to do this with racial minorities. But if you're doing it with political minorities, it can be okay. So the idea is that you would, because partisan gerrymandering is allowed, so we'll focus on that. If you were to try and create a district where you could lump together most of your Democrats in an area, yes, you would be guaranteeing that there is going to be a Democratic representative from that district. But you are also ensuring that there is a much, much lower chance, or effectively no chance, that there will be 2 Democrats winning separate districts. That is kind of one of the things that has happened with Missouri's 6th district, which is ours up here, and Emanuel Cleaver's, it won't always be his, the 5th district, which has historically been a Democrat district. Here, can't zoom in on it. That is the current 5th district, and it's tiny geographically, and it's packed in the Kansas City area, and it's kind of packed Democrats together. Okay, so they will get that seat, but they're not going to have a chance to win in the neighboring districts. And then there's cracking or diluting, where you try to split up a minority group to ensure that, as best you can, that they get no representation at all. And the district map from 2013 to 2023 kind of shows that for the 5th district. So there are different strategies have been applied to the 5th district at different times. So this still 5th district, held by Emanuel Cleaver. And it took me a while to notice this because I don't drive down I-70 all that often, but all of a sudden I noticed during a congressional election year there were all these signs for Emanuel Cleaver running in this narrow corridor along I-70. And I had a lot of other things going on in my life. I had not paid attention to redistricting, if I'm perfectly honest. And so I thought, well, that's weird that they're sending Emanuel Cleaver's district this far east. I only later realized how far east they had sent it. And what they were kind of doing, right, if I could get myself inside the heads of the legislatures, then I could probably get some of them to just tell us that this was what they were doing. They were trying to dilute his support, because this area out here, very much Republican territory. Emanuel Cleaver is not likely to get many votes out in this area. Okay? So they were cracking or diluting his district. They were also, if you're wondering what this little dog leg thing is all about in the 6th district, I can tell you because I used to drive through this area a lot. This little narrow bit is along Highway 291. And if you're driving there, you can see the McMansions on both sides, and you can kind of tell that they were throwing a little extra bit of likely Republican support Sam Graves' way. And now don't read any of this into any of my statements, my political leanings. I mean, this is the game. And that's how it's played in our state between the two districts I'm most familiar with. Okay, the third form, and I don't have an example in the Missouri map, is hijacking, where you try to draw districts such that you force two incumbents from the same party to fight each other for re-election. And kind of like Highlander, there can only be one. Obviously, one of those incumbents is going to lose, and you will have gotten rid of one member of Congress from that party that you're trying to knock out. And then the fourth is kidnapping. And kidnapping is particularly creative. What you do if you're a state legislature attempting this is you redraw districts such that where an incumbent lives is all of a sudden no longer in that incumbent's district. And if they don't live in that district, they can't represent it. So if we think about this then in the big picture, no matter what form gerrymandering takes, if you're like, where's my definition of gerrymandering? Well, you get it here. Gerrymandering is simply drawing district lines to advantage one party over another. Drawing district lines to advantage one party over another. Okay, and then our last topic in this is going to be the malapportionment of the Senate. Now, malapportionment itself sounds like a judgmental term, right? You think of malicious, malign, maleficent if you're in a Disney kind of mood. Malapportionment just means that apportionment is done so that citizens have uneven voice, uneven representation in the legislature, in this case, in the Senate. Now, House delegations, as we've already seen, reflect the population, and they shift as the population in the country shifts. But Senate delegations are always equal. It's always 2 senators per state, no matter what. This results in overrepresentation for small states. It always has. And this map is a resizing of the U.S. states based on their population size. And we'll see another map that will kind of... So that's to show you the next map, we need to move to a different slide. This map helps us understand the overrepresentation of small states. Now, this is not purely based on the Senate, but it gives us the same message. If we resize the states according to their disproportionate representation, all of a sudden California shrinks, Wyoming is massive, Vermont is huge, right? And even, well, North Dakota is actually bigger than Wyoming, but it's hard to imagine that North Dakota gets that much disproportionate influence. If you've ever driven through there, so much of it just seems like empty space. And as a result of the overrepresentation of small states, the Senate is one of the world's most malapportioned legislatures. Another way of thinking about that is one of the most unrepresentative legislatures. And this has consequences. Senate leaders are more likely to be from small states. Because even if senators are generally more vulnerable to challengers and more likely to lose their seats, senators from small states are in a stronger position as incumbents. So they get to stay in the Senate for a long time. They get seniority on committees. They get to be leaders. I mean, Mitch McConnell is from Kentucky, which actually on here is not one of the more misrepresented states, but it's still not one of the big states. It's still not like California. Another consequence is there is a GOP advantage in the Senate, built in. That does not mean it's permanent or that it has been there as long as there have been Republicans. It's really a development after the 1960s, as Republicans became more the party of rural America, which is small state America, and Democrats became the party of urban and suburban America, right, but primarily urban. And then as my previous explanation of the GOP or Republican advantage goes, there is overrepresentation of rural America. And because of their clout, small states get more federal funding than their populations would justify. One of the examples in a news story about this is how you have two neighboring communities, one in Vermont and one in New York. So Vermont is big in this map showing malapportionment. New York is small. And so you have these two neighboring communities, one in Vermont that gets lots of federal money for a small population, and things are nice. The roads are nice, right, the services are good, and then right next door is a pretty shabby community in New York. And America's population is majority urban and increasingly urban, and yet the majority urban policy goals are very often blocked in the Senate. And this is not a surprise. I mean, as I'm talking about these consequences, again, I don't want students to try and read my own politics into this. Those are just the observed consequences from political science studies. And they're also not accidents. At the Constitutional Convention, the framers recognized that the Senate would be, and always would be, malapportioned. The question is, should we do anything about it? And there, you have to decide if you like the consequences or not. It depends on what you want. For Missourians, I mean, if we think about the interests of people, particularly in our part of the state, which has a lot of rural people, you might think that malapportionment is working just fine. And in that sense, it certainly is. So it all depends on what you want. All right. That, of course, is where we will stop. Thank you guys for bearing with me in the live version. The recording will go up soon.